I'm Mark Verbos. I'm from Verbos Electronics, based out of Berlin, Germany. I'm an American, but we started the company in New York City in 2014 and moved to Berlin at the end of 2016. I'm really passionate about the bounce control on the control voltage processor because it is only implemented in that product and in no other place in the world. There's a slew rate limiter in the top section of the module that has separate controls for the rising and falling voltages. And if you would think of a slew rate limiter as a low-pass filter that's just at a really low cutoff, bounce could be thought of as a resonance control on it. What it means to a control voltage is that when the voltage jumps from here to here, the voltage actually overshoots and wobbles a little bit, and at the frequency that's related to the rise rate. So it can take very rigid mechanical, electronic type streams of control voltages and make them a bit organic. And the concept of it isn't entirely new. In the Eventide flanger, instant flanger from the 70s, they did something like that because their idea at the time was that an electronic flanger was in fact imitating the idea of running two tape machines, on top of each other and dragging your hand on the flange of the reel. And they thought that if you would restrict the motor and then let go, when it speeds back up to its original speed, that it would mechanically, that it would overshoot and bounce a little bit. So they were trying to simulate that idea. And so I adapted that. Theirs was at a fixed, it was an amount. In other words, it was a level control for this wobble, but they didn't have any ability to adjust the frequency of it. And so adapting that idea into recontextualize it into the control voltage processor, I think is really a special moment. I have an unhealthy fascination with digital effects from before microprocessors were used in them. A lot of that is reverbs, like the EMT reverbs from the 70s. I have two 244s, which are, if they're basically the Hall, which is the algorithm from the 250 that everybody loves. Just that the 250 has you can select between four algorithms, and chorus and delay, whatever. And I have a 252, which is, in my opinion, their masterpiece. I think I have 12 Eventide processors.
What gear are you particularly proud of?
There's a little bit like saying which one of your kids is your favorite, but the harmonic oscillator is the best-selling module we have. And I'm really proud of it because it is an absolutely unique implementation. There's no competing harmonic oscillator. I mean, yet, I don't know, Behringer will come along and, put us out of business. But I'm not afraid of that either, because I'm not hung up in the moment thinking that I'll never have another harmonic oscillator. For me, it wouldn't be worth making a module that isn't an improvement on something, isn't an improvement in the world. There's no reason for me to make a clone of something, because there's always something to be learned. That's why I think it's unfortunate that the world of synthesizers is, the marketplace is much more interested in clones of old things than they are in new ideas. Partially that's because the designers who are making the new things, the easiest thing you could do as a designer is a clone, because not only is the engineering already done for you, but the promotion, and it's already been anointed as a success. When you take a risk, when you come up with something completely out of the blue and then you present it to the world, that's the biggest risk that you could ever take, because maybe the idea won't connect with the people, but the the best part of being boutique, the best part of being on the fringes, which I believe that I am, is that I don't have to participate in that game. I only make the things that I love. I'm a musician myself. I've been making music using synthesizers for 30 years, and I only make things that I want to use. I can guarantee you that if I want to use the thing, that there's someone else out there who wants to use it.
How do you see your gear in the landscape of music?
The gear that I design, I think what makes it really special is that in the years that I was really specializing in repairs of vintage Buchla instruments, the number one thing that I learned from the philosophy of Don Buchla was that if you design from the musician's perspective, you design an interface that a musician will interact with, and then you figure out how to make the electronics do that then you're making an instrument, and that could never be obsolete because it's independent. It's not an exploitation of a quirk of like some technological thing. It's an instrument which the musician's ability to interact with it won't change when when version 2 comes out or something. So I think that it separates me from the pack, that I make the module that I want to use from the perspective of the using it. I draw the front panel how I think I want the interface to work, print that out on paper and lay knobs on top of it to see if it feels good to me, like to space it out that way. And then I design a circuit that fits with that. So I think it's possible that the result connects more with musicians.
What music has inspired you to make music gear?
Well, the easy answer is techno, because that's what my personal music is, in the way that I'm performing. I've been performing live using synthesizers since 1992, using like Roland, 303s and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, and then as I was evolving, I used modular things and used Buchla things that, as a repairman, I got really connected with the people and ended up getting a lot of older, rare synthesizers and old enough that I was able to buy them back when they were cheap, and this kind of stuff. But implementing that, but then also starting to implement my own designs when because of course I was making synthesizers for myself long before I was making them at a company. That experience informed my ideas about how I wished things would work. I think a lot of times those instruments that I used over the years were lessons in what not to do. Like, I found the limitations that really bothered me, and I wanted to someday design something that worked more like what I wanted. So you could say that the products that I've designed are actually like my dream synthesizer that I always wanted to have for the live performance. And I don't think that there's anything about them that forces the user to make techno. I think they are friendly to live performance, and they're friendly to improvisation with live performance. I think the older generation of synthesizers worked with what they had. Like, you can't expect something that was designed in 1970 to be really suited to the kind of music that you make in 2023. We use these things in totally different ways than they were designed to be used, and so we can design them to work the way that's best for what we do with them now.
What is the most surprising thing that you've discovered on a piece of gear that you've made?
What happens when you design something is that you imagine what you want to do with it, or me, that's what I do. Then there's a beta testing process or whatever, and we do that internally. We don't have people out in the world doing it, and we go around and around and around, like, internally trying to come up with more ideas of what we could do with something. And then the first customer we show it to brings up something that we never thought of. inevitably, the first question that's asked, wait, can it do this? And then it's what? I didn't even ever think of that. And actually, and an example of that would be the harmonic oscillator. The first question that I got when I showed it was, could I use this for like drones, or like how would you use this for drones? It was something that I never thought of at all. I wasn't like drone. But oddly, like once that's brought up, then I realize actually maybe it's the best drone producing thing ever made. That if you would send as many unrelated modulating control voltages as you can find to the CV ins for the individual harmonics, you'll create a drone that's perfectly in tune, but never repeats and has like a great evolution. So much so that I've had soundtrack producers who worked on major movies tell me, then I did the obvious thing that everybody does with the harmonic oscillator, like as if within their community there's an understanding that this is how you do it now. So that's pretty amazing to me, like to not even consider this whole branch of music and then have it become like a quintessential part of it.
How did you get into music gear making?
As a teenager, I was I started evolving from being a more conventional musician. I played instruments when I was growing up, and I was doing a rock band at 13 or 14 or whatever, and then programming a drum machine to be a part of and using a 4-track recording and playing keyboard. So I'm now playing guitar, keyboards, programming the drums, doing the engineering, recording it, and then I started to become really annoyed with the other people that I was in the band with because they didn't want to work every day, all day long like I did. So eventually it just evolved into me making electronic music alone, But then as I got more like specifically into like techno and specifically into live performance, then I was starting to gear hoard old stuff. In the early mid 90s, you could buy old synthesizers for $50, $100, kind of thing. So I bought all of these like Roland things at low prices, and I still have them. At one point, I came across an EMS VCS3 Putney for $400, and it wasn't, and it was in incredible condition, untouched essentially, but the filter didn't work, and as a 18-year-old or whatever, I opened it up and tried to fix it, and really damaged it because I really didn't know what I was doing. And then, I thought that I would, at the time, I think I really believed that I knew how to fix things, but really didn't. And then somebody connected me with another guy who was much older and who had a huge amount of experience with synthesizer. They said, call this guy, he can fix this for you. So I called this number, and the guy was like, oh no, I don't fix stuff for people anymore. Did you buy this locally? Oh, just bring it over. I can't stand it. So I brought it over to his house, and I walked into his basement, and he had every synthesizer ever. He had like an ARP-2600 and a Synthy and a Putney and an EML 101 and an EML 200 and EML 400, a 50 space Buchla, which I later learned was 200, which was the one of the two that were in CalArts that Martin Subotnick taught on in the 70s, including making 2 records on it. A music easel, which was the prototype, an 8-panel Surge, just on and on and on like this. And then he showed me the synthesizer that he was designing, and this guy turns out to be Grant Richter, who is sort of like legendary in synthesizers. But at the time, I was on the Synth DIY mailing list, but I didn't know that much. And he was one of, I was on it since the beginning, essentially. And this was only a couple years into its existence. And he was one of the village elders who knew everything there was to know already. So at that point, then I just spent as much time as I possibly could with him. So I took a basics introduction to electronics class in college, but I could read schematics and I had some idea how troubleshooting went. But the idea of building a synthesizer from nothing, that's pretty daunting. He showed me how a power supply should be connected to things. He showed me how to etch circuit boards myself and do all sorts of cool techniques for how to make front panels but mostly he had a vintage Buchla that he had done all the maintenance, and he was the guy who was fixing them for everybody who had them, which there weren't that many people who had them. But I got to use his Buchla, and he showed me repairs that he was doing, like to modules for other people or to his. And I also started to build, once I'd seen what he could do, that if he could build a synthesizer, then I could. And then when I just, made stuff and it didn't work, I could take it to him and he'd figure out why. Which is really important in the beginning stages. He was a tremendous mentor to me, and also because of him being the guy who fixed Buchlas for people and him teaching me so much, when a few 10 years down the road, when he didn't want to take on the responsibility of fixing hugely expensive, rare vintage synthesizers anymore, he sort of passed the torch to me, and I became the specialist in the Buchlas. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is not on the map for synthesizers, but it just happens that that's where he was. So it's close to Chicago, but it's just a huge amount of serendipity that would lead for me to be here today in this. And I have like a story like this for getting into the world of music, of techno music. I have a story like this for I think that the most important factor of my life has been mentors, like older people who, for whatever reason, really, went out of their way to help me.
How do you most often start on a new piece of gear?
There is nothing new under the sun. You have to remember that. We don't invent synthesizers here. What we invent are ideas and packaging strategies. And one way of looking at it in synthesizers is that you have two paths, in the sense that there are what I would call micro modules and macro modules. In other words, micro modules meaning that they have effectively one function. They're very, it's a VCA, and a VCA has an in, an out, and a control in, and that's the VCA. And then macro modules would be where what's going on in the module is more complicated than a mini-moog. Like there's a patch going on inside that's configured. It's a lot of modules configured in a way to do something special that's more curated. And I think as long as I'm trying to do the interface-driven musician perspective design, then I'm doomed to making macro modules, which, means that they're bigger and they're more expensive. But the polyphonic envelope, a module that we released last year, when I had the idea to make cascading set of envelopes that could, on my inspiration board, it was called the Strum envelope for a long time. The idea would be to recreate the idea of like strumming a guitar. I recreated the module by using existing modules that I had. And it took the whole system, and I couldn't do it. It was completely unwieldy. Like way too many things have to be tweaked to get it to do the thing, which inside of the polyphonic envelope, you can get exactly what I was struggling to get with all that stuff just by moving one fader. So I think that in the strategy is the fact that there's a huge amount of complexity to shelter the user from the complexity in order to make something that you would never be willing to do on a stage possible for you to do so simply that you will do it on a stage.
How do you know when a piece of gear is finished?
Well, it's never finished. You could keep going back and redesigning it again, or tweaking this or tweaking that, but you have to pull the plug at some point. It takes a really long time to go from idea to finished product. Not because it takes a long time, but sometimes it just lingers around like as an idea for quite a while before it ever pen goes to paper or whatever. From the moment that the pen does go to paper, then it's really quite fast to the end. And I think just like I think that ideas are coming all the time, and they're also disappearing all the time, and we have to capture lightning in a bottle. So if you rethink it for too long, then you'll lose the magic. So I want to go from theory to execution as quickly as possible. And since we manufacture in our workspace ourselves, we have a pick and place production line internally, we can do that really rapidly.
What is the best creative or production advice that you've ever been given?
10 years ago, when we're about to have our 10-year anniversary, and we got the pick and place machine in the first year. We started out with an outside manufacturer, and then decided to take it on ourselves because the backlog, like the waiting, was just too much. At the time, all the other people in the industry kind of had the idea that if you bought that equipment, that you would have to become a contract manufacturer. You would basically have to take on other companies' production just to operate this machine 24 hours a day to pay the bills. But it's just not really that accurate, because it's expensive to buy a pick and place machine, but it's also expensive to use one. So if you're making enough products, then it just a couple of production runs, you would own the machine. If and of course there's more to it than buying the machine. There's also operating the machine. And people are the most expensive part of a business. But no, it turned out to be the best idea ever. And I think since then, not that I'm like the leader that everyone follows, but I feel like the attitude has changed. Before I was doing this, but when I was doing a lot of work with vintage Buchla instruments, and I was building some custom modules that worked in Buchla systems, I had a conversation with Don Buchla, a long conversation on the phone, and he was a complicated guy, he was very difficult to talk to because he was clearly autistic and brilliant, but just very difficult to engage with. And so some days that I called him, he was out and out rude to me. And other days I got him on the phone for hours. It was really a crapshoot. But one time that I was on a really long phone call with him, I asked him if he had any advice. And he said, don't ever tell anyone what you're working on. Not to be funny, because if you decide you don't want to do it later, you're going to have to hear people asking you about it for the rest of your life. So only ever talk about the thing that you finished. Never talk about like the idea you have for something that might work. And the truth is that I have a list of ideas that may never see the light of day because I prototyped them and decided I didn't like it, or I just haven't figured out how I would make it elegantly.
Going back to this whole idea of mentorship and Don Buchla, it must have taken quite a lot of guts to just continuously call them back.
Oh, that was the most terrifying moments of my life, where like holding the phone and dialing that phone number. But I mean, he was monumental. He was so important, to the world of electronics and electronic music, but he was also just hugely important to me in the way that he sort of redefined the philosophy. He didn't want to make gear. He didn't want to make tools. He wanted to make instruments, and that was a battle that he fought until the day he died. That people didn't understand that he was an instrument builder, and as part of that instrument building, he wanted to make however many he wanted to make, and he wanted to sell them to who he wanted to sell them to, and he wanted them to work a certain way, and if that made it expensive, then that's how it's going to be. And if you buy into his vision, then it gives you the answer to every question.